The international airport was alive with constant movement. Bright departure boards flickered overhead, announcing flights to cities around the world. Families hugged each other goodbye, business travelers hurried across the polished floors with rolling suitcases, and vacationers laughed as they searched for their gates. The sound of boarding announcements echoed through the terminal, blending with the steady hum of conversations and the distant roar of airplanes taking off. Among the rushing crowd walked Ethan Carter, a 32-year-old businessman dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a dark blue tie. His neatly styled short black hair and polished leather shoes reflected his disciplined lifestyle. A slim silver watch rested on his wrist, and a black laptop bag hung over his shoulder. Every step he took was purposeful because he had an important international business meeting waiting for him. Missing this flight was simply not an option. Ethan glanced at his watch and calculated the remaining minutes before boarding. Everything was running exactly according to schedule. He had checked in early, passed security without delay, and even had enough time to grab a cup of coffee before heading to Gate 18. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues reminding him that investors from overseas were already preparing for tomorrow's presentation. Months of planning depended on this single trip. As he walked past the crowded waiting area, he barely noticed the hundreds of strangers around him. Like everyone else, he was focused only on reaching his destination. Then something unusual caught his attention. Near a large window overlooking the runway sat a young woman wearing a beautiful white wedding dress. Unlike the excited passengers around her, she wasn't speaking to anyone. She was sitting alone on the cold airport floor with her bouquet lying beside her. Her long chestnut brown hair had partly escaped from its elegant bridal hairstyle, and tears had washed away much of her carefully applied makeup. Her shoulders shook as she cried into her trembling hands. Travelers slowed for a moment, looked at her with curiosity, then continued walking without stopping. Some whispered to each other, while others simply avoided making eye contact. Ethan hesitated. He looked toward his boarding gate, then back at the crying bride. His first instinct was to keep walking. After all, he didn't know her. Whatever had happened wasn't his responsibility. Missing his flight could cost his company an enormous opportunity. Yet something about the loneliness in her eyes refused to let him ignore her. He took a slow breath, changed direction, and walked toward her. Keeping a respectful distance, he crouched beside her and spoke gently. "Excuse me, are you all right? Is there someone I can call for you?" The bride looked up, startled by the voice of a stranger. Her green eyes were red from hours of crying. For several seconds she couldn't answer. Instead, fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. Ethan quietly removed a packet of tissues from his briefcase and offered it to her. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said softly. "But you shouldn't have to sit here alone." She accepted the tissues with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered between sobs. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Ethan simply remained seated nearby while the crowds continued flowing around them. An announcement echoed through the terminal. Final boarding call for Flight 782 to New York. Ethan looked toward the departure gate. That was his flight. His phone vibrated again. "Where are you?" "Boarding has started." He stared at the message but didn't reply. The young bride slowly began to speak. "My name is Amelia," she said quietly. "Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life." Ethan listened without interrupting. This morning, everything fell apart. She explained that only hours before her wedding ceremony, devastating family news had shattered the celebration. Arguments erupted, relatives turned against one another, and the wedding was cancelled before it even began. Feeling overwhelmed and unable to face anyone, she had driven to the airport without any destination in mind, hoping to escape the pain for a while. But once she arrived, she realized she couldn't even decide where to go. She had been sitting there alone ever since. "I'm so embarrassed," Amelia admitted. "Everyone keeps staring at me. Ethan looked around at the busy terminal. "They'll forget in 5 minutes," he replied calmly. "But you'll remember how people treated you today for the rest of your life." His words made her pause. For the first time in hours, a faint smile appeared through her tears. Another announcement sounded through the airport. "Gate 18 is now closed." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. His flight was gone. He slipped his phone into his pocket without checking the flood of incoming messages. Instead of showing regret, he turned back toward Amelia with a reassuring smile. "Looks like neither of us is going anywhere today." The tension on Amelia's face softened as she realized a complete stranger had sacrificed something important simply to make sure she wasn't left alone during the darkest day of her life. In the middle of one of the world's busiest airports, surrounded by thousands of strangers rushing toward their own destinations, an unexpected friendship quietly began with a simple act of kindness. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of Carter Global Holdings, one of the city's most respected corporate headquarters. Employees hurried through the marble lobby carrying laptops, coffee cups, and stacks of reports. Elevators opened and closed every few seconds as executives prepared for an important board meeting that would determine the company's future direction. The atmosphere was unusually tense. Rumors had spread throughout the office that a new majority owner would be arriving for the first time. Nobody knew much about the mysterious executive except that the board had insisted every department manager attend the morning meeting without exception. Ethan Carter stepped through the revolving doors with tired eyes and little confidence. His navy suit, usually perfectly pressed, showed faint wrinkles from the sleepless night he had spent at the airport. His neatly styled black hair was slightly untidy, and the dark circles beneath his eyes revealed how exhausted he felt. His phone had been buzzing since dawn with messages from colleagues asking why he had failed to attend yesterday's international meeting. Some clients had already complained. Several executives expected the company's biggest contract to collapse because of his absence. As Ethan crossed the lobby, several coworkers looked at him with surprise. "You actually came? We thought you were suspended. The board has been asking about you all morning." One colleague leaned closer and whispered, "The chairman was furious. Missing that flight may have cost us millions." Ethan forced a small smile, although anxiety tightened his chest. He had rehearsed countless explanations during the drive to work, but none of them sounded convincing. How could he explain that he had willingly sacrificed the most important business trip of his career to comfort a stranger wearing a wedding dress? The elevator doors opened. Inside, silence filled the small space as department heads exchanged nervous glances. Everyone knew today's meeting would be critical. When the elevator reached the executive floor, Ethan followed the group down a long hallway decorated with framed photographs celebrating decades of company success. At the end stood two large wooden doors leading into the executive conference room. Inside, the atmosphere was formal and quiet. A polished walnut table stretched across the room beneath elegant crystal lights. Leather chairs surrounded it, while floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline. Members of the board were already seated, reviewing financial reports and speaking in hushed voices. Ethan quietly slipped into an empty chair near the far end of the table. Almost immediately, the chairman looked directly at him. "Mr. Carter." Every conversation stopped. "You failed to board yesterday's flight." "Yes, sir." "You ignored repeated phone calls." "Yes, sir." "The overseas investors waited for 3 hours." "I understand." The chairman folded his hands. "I hope your explanation is worth the damage caused." Ethan opened his mouth but hesitated. Saying that he had stayed with a crying bride sounded almost unbelievable in a room filled with corporate executives focused only on profits and deadlines. Before he could answer, the conference room doors slowly opened. Everyone turned toward the entrance. A young woman walked inside wearing an elegant cream-colored business suit with a matching silk blouse and simple pearl earrings. Her long chestnut brown hair was neatly styled, replacing the emotional bridal hairstyle from the previous day. Her makeup was natural and professional, but her calm green eyes were unmistakable. Ethan froze. His heart skipped a beat. It was the same woman from the airport. The crying bride. For a brief second, their eyes met across the room. Recognition flashed across both faces. Amelia smiled gently, though she said nothing. Several board members immediately stood. "So glad you've arrived. Welcome. We've been expecting you." The chairman stepped forward with visible respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "allow me to introduce Ms. Amelia Brooks, the new majority shareholder and chief executive officer of Carter Global Holdings." The room erupted into polite applause. Ethan could barely breathe. His mind replayed every moment from the previous evening: the airport floor, the abandoned bouquet, the missed boarding announcement, the quiet conversation, and the promise that she would not have to face her pain alone. He had assumed she was simply a heartbroken stranger. He had never imagined she owned the company where he worked. Amelia thanked the board before taking her seat at the head of the long table. Her confident posture contrasted completely with the broken woman Ethan had met less than 24 hours earlier. She opened a leather folder, reviewed several documents, then looked around the room. "I appreciate everyone's patience during this transition," she said in a calm, steady voice. "Before we begin discussing business, I'd like to address one personal matter." The executives exchanged curious looks. Amelia slowly stood. "Yesterday," she began, "I experienced the most painful day of my life." The room became silent. "I was alone at an airport, overwhelmed by circumstances that had completely shattered my future." No one interrupted. "I sat there for hours while hundreds of people walked past me." She paused. "Most people avoided looking at me." Her eyes gradually settled on Ethan. But one person stopped. Ethan lowered his gaze, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. He didn't know my name. He didn't know who I was. He expected nothing in return. He simply saw another human being in pain. Several executives glanced toward Ethan. Amelia continued. "He offered kindness instead of questions. He offered patience instead of judgment. And without realizing it, he gave me hope at the exact moment I believed I had lost everything." The chairman looked from Amelia to Ethan with growing confusion. Amelia smiled warmly. "That man is sitting in this room." Every head turned toward Ethan Carter. The conference room fell into complete silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Only then did everyone begin to realize that the employee they believed had irresponsibly missed the company's most important flight had, in reality, made a choice that revealed something far more valuable than business success: his character.